Do you have you seen a change over the years in the culture of parenting? Like, I remember my dad talking about when he was, a young man, and he said, my mum and dad would open the door, say, "Go run about and come back at 6 when it's dinner." And I can't imagine anyone in society nowadays doing that. And I'm wondering where the flip came in, because there's lots of correlation between, social media, mental health. Is there a correlation between social media and more obsessive helicopter parenting?
There's actually a correlation between the culture of fear and not opening the door, and that started long before social media. It actually started before phones. So the reason I came to any prominence at all, whatever I have, is that years ago, I'm trying to figure out exactly how many, but let's say years ago, when my younger son was 9, he's 27 now, so you do the math. He had started asking me and my husband if we would take him someplace he'd never been here in New York City, where we live, and let him find his own way home by subway. And so I did that, and I wrote a column about him taking the subway home by himself. And 2 days later, I was on every possible talk show. I think you call them chat shows uh, here in America, defending myself, which is when I started the Free Range Kids blog, which sort of grew into a movement. And so that happened, I think, even before the iPhone existed. So it's not just that social media had made this seem controversial to let your kid do something in the real world unsupervised. It had been happening for decades. And in the States, which I think sort of infects the whole world with whatever our obsessions are. And right now it's fear, along with some
Hmm.
other things. Um, in the '80s is when things really changed, at least according to my research. I wrote the book, Free Range Kids. And what happened in the '80s were a couple of seminal things. One is that we got cable television, which brought the 24-hour news cycle. I'm so old. I was growing up when news was just at night, right? You didn't have to fill 24 hours with horrible things that could keep people upset and engaged enough to keep their televisions on. Right? And then, of course, that became amplified once we got computers and social media and phones. But that was starting earlier. And a couple of other things that happened in the '80s were in the United States, we did something that just keeps resonating to this day, which is that in our understandable desire to keep kids safe, we started putting pictures on the milk cartons that we had. And they were pictures of missing children. Do you know anything about this? Is this news to you, or is this familiar?
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
Oh, okay, so let me tell you. So we had 2 very high-profile kidnappings, at the end of the '70s and the beginning of the '80s, and because those received so much attention, it started seeming like, well, no kids are safe, right? Oh my god, children are being kidnapped willy-nilly, even though, thank God, those numbers are very low, and they don't go up or down very much because it's just the rarest of crimes. We all remember the names of kids who have been murdered by strangers because they're so rare. You don't remember the names of kids who walked to school safely, over the last 40 years, but we know these certain names. And um, and in this desire to protect kids, we went way overboard. And we started putting pictures on milk cartons of missing children. It said, "Have you seen me?" or "missing!" exclamation point. And you'd see a picture of a kid on a milk carton. And what the milk carton never mentioned was that the vast majority of these kids were taken in custodial disputes between two divorced parents. I'm going to take the kid and raise him in Mexico because that's my son, or just acrimony between two parents. Or it was sometimes a runaway child who had left because home life was untenable. And the number of children snatched by strangers, even among the kids on the milk cartons, was vanishingly small. But it didn't feel small if you were sitting across from that milk carton and you saw a picture of a kid. So you have the 24-hour news cycle, you have the kids on the milk cartons, and then you have the phrase stranger danger, which really makes it into the culture in the '80s. And it starts seeming prudent, wise, necessary to not trust any strangers. And that starts changing the culture. And you don't want your kids to walk to school by themselves. The number of kids walking to school has dropped precipitously in the last generation or two, from most kids walking to school or biking to school to about 1 in 10, at least in the United States now. And so parents are driving their kids to school. The kids don't meet each other. Parents drive their kid, and you come home and they're in the garage, and then they go into the house. Kids don't even see each other on the street. And then there's a rise in organized activities for kids. whether that's soccer or football, sorry, or tutoring or ballet, all these things which can be enriching, but which start taking up almost every afternoon of a lot of kids. And we've seen this demographically across the board. It's not just the rich kids. The rich kids might be going to lacrosse, but
Mm.
everybody is doing something after school, even if it's only homework help. So you don't have kids meeting each other in the neighborhoods, hanging out, hopping on their bikes, knocking on doors. It all becomes an adult supervised structured activity. And then pretty soon it's abnormal to have your kid walk to school or hang out after school or play in the street or knock on a friend's door. And it has all been replaced by either adult run activities or now technology, whether that means kids running home and getting on their phones or parents always tracking their kids so the kids sort of feel like they're out in the world, but they know that they're always being watched. So a culture of independence in childhood became replaced by a culture of supervision, structure, and surveillance.
Also a culture of fear. I mean, when you look at the news cycles, typically the articles that get the most
Mhm.
clicks and the most
Mhm.
views are ones that are, kind of fear mongering, you could say.
Of
So would
course.
you say that it kind of comes from the top in that way? That the news cycles and the government are kind of fear mongering people, and that in turn is firstly we're having a population collapse, less people are having children, and secondly, we're sheltering our children more because of the negativity we see in the news cycles every day.
Yeah, the collapse of the birth rate is really interesting to me because there are a lot of, hypotheses, and I don't know if you can even test them. But my
Mm.
personal hypothesis is that exactly what you're saying. If it turns out that raising a kid is something that is so fraught with, you know, fear and then its corollary, which is supervision, right? If you're afraid that your kid could be, killed at the bus stop, you're going to stand at the bus stop. And I don't blame parents, especially because here in America, sometimes you're not even allowed to let your kid get off the bus in the afternoon without you being there. I've heard from parents across America fighting their schools because the school won't let a kid get off the bus until they're in first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. I've heard fifth grade. And that means that a parent just has to quit their job, right, and go and wait at the bus stop every afternoon from 3 to 3:30 so that they can walk their kid home 4 houses from the bus stop. So, what you get is a culture that seems really daunting if you're thinking of having kids, if you're planning a family. It's like, well, wait a minute. And if I have to pick up one kid from the bus stop, so if I have 4 kids, how am I going to do that? One's in high school, one's in middle school, one's in grade school. What am I going to do? And it seems really expensive because you have to have a giant car seat for each kid, and it seems daunting because how many soccer games can you get to in a weekend if you're not just allowed to say, "Kids, get out, go outside and play?" It becomes so much more intensive and expensive that, to me, it would be a little daunting to, to contemplate having certainly having a large family, but even having 1 or 2.
How did you change your mentality when raising your children?
Well, my mentality was sort of strange to begin with, I guess, because I'm a reporter by
Mm.
trade. I work for one of the big tabloids here in New York City. It's the New York Daily News. If you ever watch the Superman movies, he works for the Daily Planet. The
Yeah,
Daily
yeah, yeah,
Planet
yeah.
is the Daily News. It's shot at the Daily News. It's all based on the Daily News. So that's the newspaper I worked for. And I never worked for the news side, somebody fell out of a building and somebody caught on fire. That was not me. I was always doing features, which are the stories about like this guy has been running his father's perfume company for 3 generations, or this woman invented a new way of making pancakes. Just I would wander around the city and find stories of these people married underwater. you know, just like here's a blind gym teacher. Would you believe it? And I did a column for a long time called Dinner at Your Place, where I would go and eat dinner with anyone who would invite me over. So I would meet them and their kids and eat their food and write up their recipes, which were always missing an ingredient. So in the end, I started just using recipes from actual cookbooks. But the point is that my New York that I saw was really fantastic. It was safe, it was interesting, it was friendly, it was warm. And even in, quote unquote dangerous neighborhoods. Yesterday I was visiting a school in the Bronx. Everybody's afraid of the Bronx. And I went there was an old candy store there. I wanted to see it. I went in, I looked around, I came out, everybody's holding the door for me. "Hello, miss. Thank you, miss." And it was like there's there's so much goodwill in the city, and I saw so much of it that I was not as afraid of it as if you've only been inside watching TV about it or reading about it or scrolling about it. There's something called mean world syndrome.
Hmm.
It was a phenom that was described a long time ago, I think in the maybe in the '70s or '80s by a sociologist named George something. I realize that doesn't help us, but it's anyways, you can look it up. It's mean world syndrome, and the idea is that, um you watch TV, you see these horrible stories, you think, "God, what a mean world," "That person got shot, that person, robbed a bank." And so you are afraid to go outside, so you sit inside and you watch more television or you scroll more, and my God, here's another horrible story, and look what just happened in, literally a world away in Australia, and look what just happened in, Somalia. And so
Hmm.
you start thinking of the world as mean, and the meaner you think it is, the more insular your life becomes, the more all you're getting fed is this culture of fear from the media, and it just sort of spirals. So I avoided some of that by being the media and by being the sort of nice side of the media, actually going out in the world, meeting real people, being in neighborhoods that you might not trust, and realizing, this is pretty good. So I started out with a sort of belief in people and in my city that certainly you wouldn't have if you didn't live in New York City, because you would just have the
Mhm.
impression from, from movies and the media. And then also, I looked at old columns from before I wrote about my son taking the subway, and I saw, columns about like, I have 2 boys. I would let them go to the men's room at the theater without me. I wasn't thinking that they'd be, kidnapped or raped or anything in a public place. And I let them play in the courtyard of our building because there were a bunch of other kids and a bunch of other, and there were guards there. Actually, it was these enormous towers. So I think my parenting was based on actual reality as opposed to, um, being really infected by, as you were talking about, the worst stories from around the world. So it didn't change that much. But once I became the free range mom, I did feel a little pressure to like let my kids keep riding the subway, and walk home after dark. And I'm like, it took a little while for me to deal with the dark too. And I have to say, I still haven't gotten over my fear of my kids drive now. They're in their 20s. And I hate that. I'm really scared of cars. So there's no way to get over all anxiety as a parent, and the idea that you could is sort of pointless because you won't.
If you guys enjoyed that clip, please do me a huge favor before you go and head over to our Into the Mind podcast official page where we have the raw, uncut Into the Mind podcast, and hit that subscribe button. And the more subscribers we get, the more incredible guests we can get on the show. I really appreciate you guys for watching. Thank you so much. And I'll see you all real soon.